One of the big things that the ecosystem needs to break out of is this idea of what I call geographic scale. I've seen a lot of startups just assume that, when I do Lagos, I must do Abuja. When I do Abuja, I must do Accra, then Nairobi. Your customers may not be there. If you are looking for Owuroshoki customers in Abuja, you will look.
Meet Iyin Aboyeji, the dynamic Nigerian entrepreneur who's notched up an impressive list of successes at just 33. From co-founding Andela, which received a $24 million boost from Mark Zuckerberg, to leading Flutterwave to process over $1.2 billion in transactions, Iyin's impact on Africa's tech scene is undeniable. He also co-founded Future Africa to empower the next wave of innovators across the continent. The firm has invested over $10 million in dozens of startups, many of which are fintechs. His latest venture, Accelerate Africa, an accelerator backed by a $750,000 USAID grant, is set to be the YC of Africa. Recognized on Forbes 30 Under 30 and New African Magazine's Top 100 list, co-founding multiple companies valued at over $1 billion. Iyin is a force to reckon with in both business and policy. He continues to play a leading role in driving innovation and growth across the African tech ecosystem.
Woo! All right, ladies and gentlemen, this is an Ask Me Anything section of the day. So very quickly, very efficiently, please introduce yourself, your name, and the question you want to ask.
My name is Tehemba. I'm a product marketer. So my first question is, if you are building in a space like Nigeria or Africa in general, we are all conversant with the challenges, the policy dynamics in Nigeria and in Africa. First, from two angles. First of all, mindset-wise, what kind of a mindset do you need to have to prepare you for the kind of changes in policies that government brings? And number two is on the business side of it. What are the structures that you put in place that can actually absorb those kind of policies? We've seen drastic changes, in government policies that have shut down businesses. So what are the things that you can do to help cushion that effect?
Fantastic. Should I answer them? Okay. Thank you very much, first of all. It's such a pleasure to be here. Timi, just to answer your question very quickly, first of all, mindset-wise, you need to innovate at the edge. So try your best to see what existing regulations exist for what you do. Then try your best to kind of tweak it a little bit so that it doesn't exactly fit it. So I like to use examples. Now, there's a difference between taxi and rideshare, but in reality, there's no difference, right? Because they're pretty much the same thing. However, because we called taxi rideshare, we were able to create regulation for ride sharing, right? Separate from what exists for taxis. And just simply by doing that, we had the ability to create a brand new set of policy and regulation that worked for us. Does that make sense? The second mindset you have to have is that if government's business is your business, they will never shut you down. Government always has to make money from what you are doing. So when we did, for example, with Move, right? Lagos's ride-sharing regulation has a 50 naira per trip fee, which we wrote into the regulation, so that every trip they're getting paid. So that means that before they shut us down, they have to really think about it. Do you understand what I'm saying? With Flutterwave, there was stamp duty, right? And we also paid the banks a percentage of each payment, about a third of it, 30% of it. So before the banks will tell the CBN to shut us down, or before, it will take time. They will have to think about it, that all this money that we are making, are we sure we want to lose all that money? The third thing is, it's very, very important, right, to build great personal relationships with your regulator. A lot of people believe that they can hide from the regulator and build a great business. The truth of the matter is, it's not possible. So you have to build great personal relationships. And it's very easy to do when you are young, when you are not so big, because they don't look at you as a threat. You're like an adornment. You're like a small guy, so you look cute. You're not threatening like the other big boys. So you have to use that to your advantage. You have to learn how to prostrate very well. You understand? You have to learn how to speak respectfully. You have to give them good suggestions. Whenever they call you for meetings, you show up and you manage them well, proactively, so that you have the space to grow. And the interesting thing is that when there are opportunities, right, you will be the first person that they will talk to. When they need advice on what to do, you'll be the first person that they talk to, right? And that will put you in pole position to build a very successful business. Have I answered your question?
How do you get to be a faith-led investor? And how do you get to balance between your faith and then building? Aside that, what's your advice to a young builder who's actually like trying to balance between faith and building too?
Sure. So, first of all, I'm not a faith-led investor. Neither am I a faith-based investor. I call myself a faith-driven investor, which is slightly different. So what does that mean? It doesn't mean that I only invest in Christians. It also doesn't mean that every investment that I make, I go somewhere and I pray for 5 days and then I now decide, that's not what it means. So what being a faith-driven investor means is that where other people see challenges, where other people see mountains, you see opportunities because you're looking at it with eyes of faith, right? So I remember what our firm does, Future Africa, is that we invest in the biggest challenges. All the things that all the investors say, this is why we don't invest in Nigeria, right? And that's why we continue to be successful in this market. So people are like, well, youth unemployment is high, people don't have jobs, so that's why I don't invest in Nigeria. You don't have technical talent. That's why I don't invest in Nigeria. So we look at that and we say, well, what if we can train the technical talent and place them? And that's how Andela is born, right? People look at the payment space. I remember when I was building Flutterwave, there was an event where InterSwitch was there, and they said, oh, web payment is an 80 million naira opportunity. It's not worth our time. And I remember being like, okay, are you serious? But, and now that sounds absolutely ridiculous, right? Because we looked at that opportunity and we said, well, these people don't think web and mobile payments are important. We think they can be very big. So let's go and invest in this space, even though InterSwitch has already captured all the ATM and cash channels, right? So it means looking at opportunities with eyes of faith. Now, to do so, it's not a question of balancing, right? Because the reality is that you're taking on a lot of risk. In my case, like I take on a ton of risk with each business that we invest in, because we have to make big, bold bets when it seems like it's an insane thing to do. For example, I think we're one of the few VCs that are still investing in this market. And actually, unlike most other VCs, we've increased our check size, right? From $50,000 in our last fund to $500,000 in our current fund. So that's over $700 million per check. It would be insane for anybody to do that now, but because we can do that because we are faith-driven investors, we know that there's something here and that we can tap into it. But the truth of the matter is that somebody asked me this question. It's like, how do you even know? How do you know? I'm like, actually, I don't know. For me, this is where my personal faith then comes in, where I have to pray, I have to be convinced, I have to receive that peace in my heart that this decision that we're taking makes sense. I actually don't know before the fact. I actually know the pros and the con because they are all arguments. But sometimes, you cannot just be contrarian for the sake of it, especially if you're investing other people's money. That's reckless, right? So you actually have to have, some general sense of faith. And that faith for me is then that comes through my prayer, understanding what is the will of God for this particular direction I'm going into, and so on and so forth. So that's how to think about it. Did that answer your question? It can't be a balance. You have to be sent to do the work that you're doing.
What are the things you look out for when you're trying to find a partner or a co-founder to build a business with? And how important is that to the trajectory of the business?
Absolutely. So co-founders are extremely important, because if you're trying to build a business that is going to change the world, you can't do it alone. It's very difficult to do it by yourself. I mean, you can, but it's very difficult. For me, given my own experience, I think the first thing I'm looking for is a shared vision, right? Does this person share my point of view about why this problem is important and what it takes? Then the other thing I'm looking for is essentially commitment. What is this person willing to give up to make this thing a reality? Or do they just think that it's secondary to whatever it is? Like, maybe they don't share an equal level of commitment, because my experience is one person has to care more about the business than everybody else for it to be successful. But at the very least, are they willing to risk something? Are they willing to put in either money or time? Or, like, I see a lot of founders, they're partnering with co-founders that want to be paid. You get what I'm saying? And I'm like, that does not make a lot of sense, right? You have to be able to have that conviction, right? The third thing that I look out for is values. And that's the most important thing. Who is this person in a closed room? Who is this person when they're not, performing for me at an event or on Twitter? And it takes time to discover who they are. How do they handle conflict? What is important to them? What are their ethics? Do they match mine? How do they react to things? How do they make decisions? How do they think about the world? Those are things that you only discover with time. So what I usually advise founders to do is, when you come to events like this, don't come looking for a co-founder. Just come looking to meet people and be helpful to people and get to know them at close quarters. Over time, if it is God's will, that's my view, a co-founding relationship will naturally emerge. But if you come here looking for a co-founder, you will probably meet, just like you won't want to get married to somebody you met in a club. I don't know, maybe that's how they do it now. You want to build a relationship with that person, date for a few months, before you then decide, okay, this person is my co-founder.
My name is Chisom, and my question is, for someone that is building like a fintech product that is wallet-based, and they want to launch, does the person require the CBN licensing before they launch? And if yes, how can such a startup be able to navigate getting the funding for that, since they are just rolling out?
So that's a great question. I think it depends on the way the solution is designed. So my understanding is that if the design of the solution is such that you're in custody of the funds in that wallet, then you require a CBN license. But if your solution is designed such that it's just a virtual wallet and you're not in custody of the funds, either the user is in direct custody of their funds, or ultimately the bank is in direct custody of the funds, there is some sort of forbearance around that. But it really depends on the contract that you sign. So one mistake a lot of founders make, when we did this at Flutterwave, we had to sign more than just a partnership agreement. It was basically like a software service agreement, so to speak, where we had no control over the software. The software was the bank's, right? And we had just agreed with the bank that in exchange for using our software, we will get a share of revenue, which is okay if the bank agrees, right? And in fact, to make sure it was believable for the central bank, at that time, we were sharing a majority of our revenue. You get what I'm saying? With the bank with the bank. So I think at the time it was 70-30 between us and Access Bank. So you have to think about that when you want to launch and while you work towards your own license, right? And I think it's good for you to do it that way and start out that way so you can get launched, get consumers, get customers. Then over time, you can now build the muscle to then get your own license, to get, everything that you need, knowing fully well that the market that you were originally conceptualizing exists. Then you can now move things over. I don't know if that makes sense.
So what will you say to someone who has a 9-to-5 job, but he still has a builder mindset? Maybe his job is taking a toll on him. He doesn't have time for to start a startup. What's the pathway the person should follow that will enable you to build a startup?
That's a great question. So I think you have to start off with a sense of what success looks like. Because oftentimes what stops people from jumping in is fear. And you have to distinguish between fear and rationality. Do you understand? They're not often the same thing. There is such a thing as irrational fear. In fact, a lot of fear is irrational, right? So you have to say, look, this is what this business has to be able to pay me for me to be able to live. And then you have to be willing to pay whatever price, right, that decision requires. That means probably you're not sleeping, right? That means probably you're spending less time with your family. That means probably your performance at your job is probably not going to be 100%. And you have to accept it, that this success will come at a price. One of the things I see a lot of people do is believing they can have it all. It's a lie. You cannot have it all. If you want a successful startup, there's a lot you must sacrifice for a successful startup. I've been in that situation much, much earlier in my career. And what I realized after a month was that I wasn't delivering for my employer. And my employer was not okay with that. So I quit. Rather than not delivering for my employer and being distracted from my startup, I just quit and decided to focus. And of course, I had planned well, so I had a few savings, some of which I put in this startup. I had, a general sense of how much runway I had before I could create traction. By the way, the company still failed. But at the very least, I felt good that I gave it my best shot. I think that's often the biggest regret with people who are employed, is that oftentimes they never actually really got a chance to give the startup their best shot. And the reality is that if you're actually very talented, you can always find another job. So just have an end date in mind, whether it's this is when I quit the startup or this is when I quit my job. But just have, okay, how do I know within 3 months if things are not going in this direction after I quit? Let me get back into the job market. Or if within 3 months I'm not making this sort of progress, then within the next 3 months I need to know, am I staying in to try something new or not? I find that what the worst outcome is what I call false sense of security. That comes with this belief that you can juggle a job at full throttle and a startup at full throttle. Something must suffer. The problem is that if you don't consciously make that decision of when you're going to jump ship, you're going to end up in a scenario where you're a poor performer at both. So you don't advance in your career, and you end up with a very poor performance review, poor references, and you have integrity issues, right? Because people don't like it. Or you end up with a startup that never really reached its full potential, not because the customers didn't exist or because the idea wasn't a good idea, but simply because you didn't have the ability to try hard enough. So I hope that answers your question.
For startups that are building from Nigeria, let's say Lagos, how do we scale that solution to other states? Most businesses don't expand to other nook and crannies of Nigeria. And then apart from Nigeria, other African countries, and apart from that, the global world at large. Fantastic. Then the second question, is how do one align your team members? You have them, but you want them to build with you, but they are not fully aligned to build with you. How do you communicate that and bring them together to make them aligned? Thank you, sir.
Fantastic. Let me start with the second question. So I have team members that are not fully aligned. I think the first question you have to ask yourself is, what is this person's role on my team? Right? Because no matter what, if somebody is playing a role on your team, that role has to be effectively filled. Right? Now, if somebody is playing a role on your team and that role does not require commitment, right? Ask yourself, if what you're paying for that role is commensurate to the value that role adds, right? Because sometimes I see a scenario where, you're working with a developer. Maybe what you want to do in reality doesn't require deep thinking, technology thinking, design, or skill. And you can really work with this really good guy to just do the bare minimum and get you out the door. Maybe he will help you with your MVP. Be realistic, right? And say, okay, you know what? You're just doing my MVP. No problem. I'll get you in as a contractor, right? I'll pay you whatever you need to be paid. Just deliver my MVP. And then I know that I'm sharing the burden. What doesn't work oftentimes is what I call resume shopping. So you have somebody on your team, not because they're actually adding value, but because you think you need them because of their resume. Investors see through that, right? Because if we see the same CTO in 3 startups, 4 startups, we know you're just resume shopping, and that person cannot possibly be adding value to your startup. Do you understand what I'm saying? So really ask yourself, what exactly is it that I need this guy for, right? Then the second question you now have to ask yourself is, what kind of commitment do I require from them, right? So if the commitment is low commitment, like I just need you to build my app, I don't really care how you do it. If you have boys in your shop that will just do it, just deliver my app, let me be going. You compensate for low commitment. If you need a third partner, somebody that is invested in the business, etc., if that person is not willing to give you that commitment, you're wasting your money and your time. So you need to now look for somebody that can give you the level of commitment that you require. And then the third question you have to ask is this sustainable? Is this relationship sustainable long term? Because if it's not sustainable long term, then you don't want to get into a long-term contract. I see people working with co-founders over 4-year vesting periods, and the co-founder is a silent partner, right? You're giving the guy equity, he's vesting equity every month, but he's not actually adding that value that you're looking for. You have to be, even though I say I love co-founders, you have to be confident enough in your product and your vision to wait for the right co-founder, right? So if the relationship is not sustainable, it looks like something that will work for 1 year, have a conversation, an honest conversation, and compensate for that time period. What doesn't work, though, is expecting something for nothing. So if you're a business founder, you know you need a technical thought partner who's passionate about the problem. You meet a technical guy who's passionate, and then you want to give the person 0 equity or 1% equity. Those days have gone. You now need technical people as partners. So you want to think about that. To your first question, very quickly, one of the big things that the ecosystem needs to break out of is this idea of what I call geographic scale, right? Because in Lagos, there are like 5 markets. There are 5 different Lagoses. The Lagos of Obanikoro, Yaba, is very different from the Lagos of Ikoyi. It's very different from the Lagos of Abraham Adesanya. It's very different from the Lagos of Owuroshoki. It's very different from the Lagos of, I don't know, Ali Mosho. Do you understand what I'm trying to say? There are like 5 different Lagoses. What you need to do is identify your demographics. What is the demographic of your customer base? What is their income level? What are their buying patterns? How do they buy? What do they do? How do they do it? Because if you're serving people that live in Ikoyi, you might as well be serving people that live in London. That's the truth. They have the same costs. They have the same way of thinking. They have the same cost structure. They have the same buying pattern, right? If you're serving people that live in Banana Island, you might be as well be serving people that live in Texas, in Katy. They probably have a house there, Seth. as well. So think demographically, don't think geographically. And then look for your customers wherever they are in the world, right? When it's time to scale. I've seen a lot of startups just assume that, oh, when I do Lagos, I must do Abuja. When I do Abuja, I must do Accra, then Nairobi. Your customers may not be there. If you are looking for Owuroshoki customers in Abuja, you will look. And if you are not willing to go to Nyanya, or you are not willing to go to Karshi, or you are not willing to enter Bush, you are not going to see them. You are going to be looking for them in Maitama, and you'll be very disappointed. Or you go to Nairobi, and you're looking for Alimosho customers. They don't have. Do you understand what I'm saying? So some of you have good products. They work in Ikoyi and Lekki. I think it's even more reasonable for you to go to London from there, because the buying patterns are similar, as opposed to going to Alimosho or going to, another poor African country that has the same dynamics. Let me be honest with you. Lagos, except you are going to Cape Town, Lagos is as good as it gets in Africa. That's my belief. Except you want to sell to Karen or, and those markets are much smaller. There are more millionaires in Lagos, right, than there are in many other African countries. So if you want to be selling to rich people, you might as well just stay in Lagos.
All right. Thank you so much, Iyin. That's our final question. Thank you. Please, ladies and gentlemen, can we put our hands together? Thank you so very much. We appreciate you and your time. Thank you so much.